Welcome back to this week's episode on As It Relates to Podcasting. I am Simona, host of the show, and over the next 5 episodes, we are actually doing a 5-part series all about monetization, and I'm doing this series solo. So I know you are used to having a co-host on here with me, a guest on here with me, but today's episode and the next 5 episodes are going to be a solo show with me, which I'm super, super excited about. So let's get into today's topic. We are talking all about monetization over the next 5 episodes. And I wanted to talk about this because I feel like this is one of the most sought after questions, one of the questions I get all the time, especially when it comes to making money through a podcast. So I thought, what better way than to do a 5-part series on it and give you all the information that I have and give you the full scoop. Before we get into this series, I will remind you that I do have a Patreon for this podcast. So if you want to binge all 5 episodes and you don't want to have to wait until they release every single week, you can head on over to my Patreon. The link is in the show notes, and you can just click through. And for a very low fee every single month, you get access to all of the episodes right at the click of a button. And you also get bonus content from me in there too, answering your questions and other videos and all that kind of stuff. So head on over there so you can get all of the information right off the bat. I also want to tell you that in alignment with this episode and the next 5 episodes, I have a free download for you, and you can find the link to that in the show notes as well. This free download is 7 ways to monetize your podcast, and I go a little bit more in depth than what we're going to be talking about on the podcast over the next 5 weeks. So just be sure to check that out as well, and you can grab it for free. It is right in the show notes below. So take a look at that and let me know if you have any questions. I can't wait to hear from you. In this episode specifically, we're going to be talking about podcast sponsorship and podcast advertising. Now, I wanted to start off with this as the very first episode because this is oftentimes the way that podcasters want to start, that this is where they want to begin when it comes to monetizing their show. It's not always the easiest way, to be honest with you, but there are some key things that you need to know when it comes to this type of advertising. Now, when it comes to sponsorship, it involves creating genuine partnerships with different companies that align with your podcast's content and that provide value to your listeners. And I will caveat this entire episode that if you're watching this instead of listening to it on a podcast app, if you're watching it on my YouTube channel, I am glancing down at my computer because I want to make sure that I'm capturing all of my notes for you, everything that I want to share with you. And sometimes I need a little bit of help. So I'm just going to be referencing that a little bit. I just want to throw it out there in case you see my eyes going up and down and you're wondering why. So let's start by understanding all of the various aspects of podcast advertising. Now, if you're familiar at all with podcast advertising, you're going to know that it comes in all kinds of different formats. So you have your pre-roll, you have your mid-roll, and you have your post-roll. Pre-roll ads are placed at the beginning, mid-roll are in the middle, and post-roll are towards the end. And to be honest with you, each of these different ad placements should have different costs for them because listener retention tends to be higher in the beginning of an episode, trailing off in the middle of an episode, and by the end of the episode, not everyone always makes it to the very end. We know that. Now, when it comes to these ads, they can either be host read or they can be separate as an actual ad for the podcast. When it's host read, I actually prefer that method personally, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I prefer that so much because I feel like it's such an easy way to slide in a product or slide in a recommendation that feels very natural and feels very part of your podcast episode. Another question that I get a lot is, okay, great. Now I have my ad placement, but what do I charge? Like, how do I figure out how much I want to charge for this ad spot? I'm going to start off by just saying, like, it is totally up to you what you want to charge on your podcast for your ad spot. I have seen it been done in so many different ways. What's really important to remember here, though, is you are selling a space on your podcast and you get to decide what that looks like, right? In partnership with the person or the sponsor that you're talking to. So you get to decide exactly what you want to charge. You get to decide how long those ads stay in for, and you get to kind of go back and forth and bounce around different ideas with the collaborator that you're working with to make sure that the sponsorship fits both sides equally. So traditionally, when you think about podcast advertising, we're thinking about this in a cost per 1,000 downloads. So what that means is typically the going rate for that is about $25. So that means every 1,000 downloads on one podcast episode, you are receiving $25 is typically how it works. And so if you've guessed by now, that's actually not a lot of money, especially if your podcast is getting 30, 40, 50, 100, 150, 200 downloads an episode. It's really not a lot of money when it comes to securing a sponsor. So this is why I prefer going the partnership route, because I think it's really important to be able to pull in and tie in the different elements of your business or your brand to make that partnership way, way, way stronger and have your advertising be a component of your overall sponsorship, but not the main deal. Now, how do you approach potential sponsors? This is a really good question. And it's one that I get all the time from podcasters everywhere. They're like, okay, great. But like, how do I reach out? What do I include? What do I write? So now you're going to want to start by identifying potential sponsors. You want to look for companies that sell or offer products and services that really will resonate with your podcast audience. You want to make sure that whatever it is that you're putting and you're promoting on your show is actually relevant to your audience, and you want them to actually buy it, because if they don't buy it, that sponsorship is useless to the company, because they're like, okay, this is great, but like this ad has done nothing to bring money back to our bottom line, right? So you always want to make sure that it's mutually beneficial on both sides. Now, I want you to consider what is going to be so relevant and so helpful and something that your listeners will actually be genuinely interested in. Because, like I said, this alignment is crucial for the success of your podcast advertising and sponsorship and for the relationship that you're going to build with them. And this is why it is so important to do your research and to find brands and products and companies and services that are in full alignment with you, that are in full alignment with your brand, because you ultimately want them to buy, right? The next thing that you're going to do is you're going to craft a pitch, and you're going to showcase all of your podcast's unique values and reach. It's really important to include that. So let's talk about this a little bit. As you start to establish those connections with potential advertisers and potential partners, you'll need to set competitive rates and negotiate different deals. I want you to consider your podcast downloads, your listener demographics, where your audience is listening in from, and your engagement metrics. And then you want to research your different industry standards to make sure that your podcast is in alignment with what you are asking for and what the sponsor would typically do. Now, I want you to be open to negotiating. I want you to be open to creating packages and customizing things that align to your potential sponsors' overall vision and mission and their own values, right? It's really important to keep that open mind, and it's really important to be able to consider all sides when you're negotiating brand deals and when you're doing brand partnerships, because again, I go back to this factor of you want it to be mutually beneficial. You need it to be mutually beneficial in order for it to succeed. Now, I want to talk a little bit about developing a media kit, because this is a really crucial part and point to this whole process. A media kit is a really powerful tool that showcases your podcast stats, the mission, the vision, the values, the demographics, who is listening, where are they listening in from, what a potential sponsor could gain, how this partnership is mutually beneficial to both sides. And also, having this media kit is beneficial to the other side, to the sponsor side, because they get to see the value that you bring, that you're bringing forth, and that you're creating within their mission, their vision, and their goals. You're also showcasing the very unique opportunity that working with you and your podcast presents. The next piece that you want to do here is customize your pitch. This is really, really key, because you want to customize every single pitch that you're sending to every single sponsor, and you don't want it to be cookie cutter. You don't want it to be the same, and you don't want everyone to receive the exact same pitch from you. Show them and tell them how their brand can specifically benefit from working with you and working with your podcast. Show them that you understand their target audience, and tell them how your podcast can reach that audience and effectively engage with them to have the best possible outcome for everybody involved. As you present your pitch, you want to make sure that you have different types of collaboration rates prepared. I want you to be prepared to offer different packages that cater to different levels of exposure. So these packages can include all kinds of things like ad reads, mentions on social media, or even sponsored episodes. You can also have them collaborate with your newsletter. You can have them collaborate with you on other social media platforms, offline. There are so many different options. So you want to make sure that you have packages that are standard, and you also want to have packages that are customizable. You want to list out those one-off services or those one-off deals that you're happy to make, like one story on Instagram or one TikTok or one paid ad. So you want to make sure you have all of those different things listed because someone might want to go in and create like an a la carte type of collaboration deal with you. And the biggest reason why you want to do this is because the more options that you have available, the more a sponsor will see like, oh, wow, look at all the different ways that we can work together. This person is very easy to work with and they're agreeable and they give us different opportunities and different perspectives. And that will increase the likelihood of you securing a sponsor. And so I'm not saying all of this with the intention of like, this is going to happen overnight. You're going to get a sponsorship tomorrow. You send out your pitch today and everything is all well and good. But what I am saying is that it does take time. So you want to make sure that you're following up. You want to make sure that your pitch is strong. You want to make sure that you have a strategy behind what you are creating and how you're putting it out there and how you're positioning yourself, because having that strategy is what's going to lead you to success and will allow you to close more of those sponsorship deals, more of those brand deals, and ultimately bigger bottom line for yourself as the podcaster and the host, as well as the sponsor who is providing that sponsorship. The goal is for everyone involved to make money. So you want to think about that when you're doing all of this. Once you've secured your advertiser, now you want to start thinking about how do I take this ad and create it and embed it into my podcast episodes? How do I create a very seamless experience for my audience when they're listening to my show and get them to hear my excitement about what it is that I'm selling, what it is that I've partnered with, or what it is that I think that they should check out? Because ultimately, you're never going to put anything on your podcast that you don't fully believe in yourself. And if you are doing that, maybe don't do that because that kind of just goes like out of alignment with, who you are and how you do things. And I'm not trying to sound judgy when I say that. It's just really hard to sell things that you don't believe in. So when it comes to creating different ads for your podcast, I want you to consider thinking about it like telling a story. Like you're walking someone through a story and you're telling a friend, you're talking to a friend and you're just telling them about this amazing product, this amazing service that you've tried out, that you highly recommend, that you really want them to get on board with, that you want them to check out. And it has to align with the tone and the style of your podcast. And this is what I was talking about a little bit earlier when I was saying that I would prefer to just read out the ads as part of my intro or as part of my podcast episode, because I just prefer that in so many different ways. I would just rather tell you about a product or tell you about a service that I'm using, embed it into the podcast episode, and have you go and check it out. And so, for example, I'll give you one right now. I'm an affiliate for Descript. I really love Descript. I think it's an amazing product. I use it every single day. I edit every single podcast episode with it. And there's a link in the show notes if you wanted to check it out. And so that is literally an example of an ad if you wanted to. It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be like, this big whole thing. It can be, but it can also just be you just being very honest and very genuine about what you're so excited to share with your listener. Now, you can also create an ad as its own separate track, its own separate piece, and you can put this into your episode, cut this into your episode using different stings or music or breaks in the conversation to signal for your listener that there's an ad break coming. And I'm going to be honest, I don't always love this approach, only because someone will listen to this episode and they're going to hear, they're going to hear a sting, they're going to hear some music, they're going to hear a break, and they're going to be like, oh, like that's an ad that's coming. You know what? Forget it. Let's just fast forward through. And then if someone's heard it once, then they may, notice again that sound, that cue, and they may just skip over. So I feel like you have a better relationship with your audience and more of an ability to build that relationship and to get them to try the product when you're speaking and recommending it because you truly believe in it. You always want to remain authentic and you always want to remain in your own integrity, especially when you're working with sponsorships and ads and all that kind of stuff. I personally would rather talk about the product in question as part of my intro. I like to embed it that way. I like to have that connection. I like to tell people why I want to use something and why I think that they should too. And I just feel like it's a little bit more conversational, to be honest with you. Then the last piece and the last component that I want to talk about really quick here is just this idea of being able to track and to measure your ads and the effectiveness of your ads. And the reason why you want to do this is because advertisers and sponsors are going to want to know, they're going to want to see how did it convert, where did it convert from, and where did the traffic come from. So that's super important. And you can do this through custom URLs or you can do it through promo codes. They're really, really easy to track. And one key thing with all of this data is now you have data to send to a potential sponsor or send to the sponsor that you're working with to show them the effectiveness of the campaign and why you can continue to work together and why you should continue to work together. And on the flip side of that, you can also use it to see where the campaign may be dropping off, where you have different opportunities, and how you can look to make things a little bit better with just a couple more tweaks. As we wrap up this episode today, I want to remind you that I do have a freebie for 7 ways to monetize your podcast. You can find that in the link in the show notes, as well as binge all of the next 5 episodes of this series by going to my Patreon and check that out there. That's the link for that is in the show notes as well. And I will say that technically those were both ads. And you see how I just rolled it into my outro for you before we close off the episode? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. It just makes it so much easier to relate to people and to share with them why something will be helpful for them and why they should consider it. I want to share one more closing thought for you. There are so many different ways to monetize your podcast, and we're going to talk about them over the next few weeks. But I want to just say that this method is not always the quickest and it is not always the most effective. And depending on where your downloads sit, honestly, you might want to consider something else. And that's totally okay too. And still try. You never know what's going to happen. You never know how you're going to land a sponsor, and you never know what could be happening next. So don't box yourself in. And also just be aware and be, realistic that you may not be making hundreds of thousands of dollars off of your podcast. And that is totally okay. You got to have a strategy when it comes to monetization. And so I hope that that's what you gain over the next few episodes is that strategy and the ability to place it into your podcast in the most effective way for you. So thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode. If this was helpful, let me know on social media, tag me, let me know you're listening, send me a DM on Instagram. I love to hear from you and I love to see that you're listening. So it means so, so, so much to me. So with that, I hope you have an amazing day. Thanks for being here with me on this episode, and I'm going to see you on the next one.